So a very good morning to you. You're very welcome to this morning's Signpost webinar. We do hope you're keeping safe and well and that you're getting to explore the amazing Irish countryside at the moment. My thanks to Pat Murphy and to Pádraig Foley for keeping the seat warm for the last few weeks. And this series is brought to you by Teagasc in collaboration with Dairy Sustainability Ireland, the National Rural Network, and Food and Drink Ireland Skillnet. There are over 145,000 recorded archaeological monuments around the country in private and public ownership, with the latest research suggesting evidence of human activity in Ireland well over 10,000 years ago. The Irish countryside is unique in Europe in the number of ancient monuments that survive, and farmers play an important role in the preservation and the protection of these features. I'm delighted to be joined by Hugh Carey, who is an archaeologist with the National Monument Service, and Dr. Catherine Keena, Countryside Management Specialist with Teagasc. Hugh and Catherine, you're very welcome to today's webinar. Good morning.
Good morning, Mark. Thanks.
So Hugh, you're going to give us a presentation on what's happening in the National Monument Service, and Catherine, you're going to help us out with the questions and answers at the end of Hugh's presentation. But firstly, Hugh, could I ask you just maybe to tell us a bit about the work that you're doing in the National Monument Service?
Well, we implement national monuments legislation. Really is a kind of a prime task that we'd have. So we would issue licenses for excavations. We would be involved with all the national monuments which are owned by the state. They're owned by our minister, in effect, and the OPW. We have an arrangement with the OPW where they do all the sort of looking after the monuments, but they're actually in the ownership of our minister. We implement national monuments legislation with regard to potential problem damage maybe to monuments. We're also involved in the planning system. We're involved with World Heritage. We have an archive that is available to the public. So it's a wide range of activity actually that we take part in. And a part of my job as well is involving myself in the agri-environment end of things as well, and I've had great contact with Catherine and Teagasc generally and the Department of Agriculture over the years as well. So.
And I see that the National Monument Service has a campaign running at the moment around protecting our heritage. I think protecting our past is the tagline.
Yeah, that's it. It's I suppose it's highlighting to some degree the need to protect our monuments, in the sense that there has been some damage occasionally done to monuments over the years, but really I think it's more positive as well, in that we want to bring people's attention to the existence of these monuments, which, as I'll be saying in the course of the talk, and as you said in your introduction, in fact, is a very unusual aspect of the Irish countryside. We've so many, and many of them are accessible. Many of them owned by the state and completely accessible, other ones just accessible on farmland around the country. And it's really that kind of positive message we want to give to people too, that there's a great public good out there, something that's free to them. And we'd love to have them go and, get interested and visit these monuments as well in the field.
Yeah. I know that a lot of countries look with envy at the amount of heritage and built heritage that we have in this country. Catherine, you've been for the last, most of your career was working with farmers to help them and educate them about the value of this built heritage on their land.
Yeah, and I think it's growing. There would have been a time when monuments would have been removed for production, and I think we've moved far away from that now, where farmers are seen to produce public goods, and we're probably more familiar with the food and the biodiversity and the water and the climate. But I think the one that should be added in there is the cultural heritage. It's small, and I suppose it has suffered over the years because it is small both on farm and it's not every farm that has them, so it's a niche area. But all the more reason that it's more important on a farm that has got them.
Really, I suppose it's part of our DNA, really, this whole array of monuments that we have across the country. And of course, we're just about to enter National Heritage Week, officially starting tomorrow, running till the 22nd of August. So today's and next week's presentations are part of National Heritage Week. And I do encourage anybody with an interest in heritage, or even if you don't have an interest in heritage, maybe you might surprise yourself that some really amazing events happening across the whole country, and more than likely there's something happening in your local community. So do check out National Heritage Week, and I'm sure you'll find something that will be of interest to you or your family. So Hugh, we might ask you to share your screen with us for your presentation, and just to remind everybody that you can submit questions to us using the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. And today's session is being recorded and will be available on the Teagasc website along with Hugh's presentation. And we do have the auto transcription running at the bottom of the screen. You can switch that off if it's you find it distraction, but we do know that there's many of you that do find it helpful. So Hugh, we'll hand over to you.
That's great. Thank you very much. Well, I'll just hold on. No, it won't move the slide on for me there, which I thought it would. Oh, there we are. Good, good. There's always a little moment of tension at the start. Well, just to first of all, thank you all for for logging in and joining me this morning. Just to give you an idea of what I'll be talking about this morning, I'll first of all give a kind of a very brief rundown of the types of archaeological monuments. It's not going to be an exhaustive list. It's just to kind of make you aware of if you like, the space that we're in. And after that, I'll talk briefly about how and why monuments are protected. Then, bearing in mind that it's a Teagasc event, I wanted to talk about archaeology in the Rural Development Programme, particularly in the agri-environment schemes, which is an area I deal with a little bit in work. And then, having discussed that a bit, we'll go on to the future in that sort of context, if that's okay. I'm not going to try and turn you into archaeologists. You can do that yourself. And the place to start is a series of articles that are still available on the National Monument Service website at the address you see on the screen there. And there are a series of articles that were written by National Monument Service archaeologists in 2012 and published in the Farmers Journal. So you can see there are 12 of them there, and they go from the earliest times up to the early 17th century, say. So you'd have a good kind of coverage of the types of monuments and the kind of, I suppose, the farming viewpoint, if you like, or the interaction between archaeology and farming from those. So they're still available online, should you want to have a look at them. Now, this is just an extract from a not very pretty one. I'll tell you why I've chosen this particular image now in a second, but it's just an extract from the Historic Environment Viewer, which is the public-facing portal of the National Monument Service. And all those red dots marked there are archaeological monuments, and the blue ones are other built heritage, but the red ones are archaeological monuments. And the reason I'm showing you this is because, well, for a start off, as Mark was saying in the introduction, there are about 120,000 records of archaeological monuments on the Historic Environment Viewer in various stages of repair or disrepair, you know, accessible, not accessible, ones owned by the state or a local authority and other ones in private ownership. But the vast majority of them are in fact in private ownership and on farmland. And the reason I've just taken a kind of a chunk out of the map to show you where the dots are is to make the point that they're clearly not congregated in towns. They're scattered across the countryside in private ownership on farmland. And that's unusual in a kind of a European context. If you think of places you've gone on your holidays, you don't really see archaeological monuments scattered across the countryside in the way that you do here. I mean, even if you think of our nearest neighbor in the UK, who are kind of a bit of a superpower in a way, in the way that they, you know, mark their heritage and preserve it, and, you know, they've the National Trust and English Heritage and Scottish Heritage and all the rest, amazing organizations and terrific towns. But even driving around the countryside in the UK, you don't see, you know, monuments to the extent that you do on any drive, long or short, in this country. So it's just to make that point. It's quite a special kind of feature of our landscape here that gives it a particular character, and I think it deserves a recognition in that for that reason. So just to give you the kind of background, again, as Mark was saying, the earliest evidence for human activity in Ireland goes back to around 10,000 BC. In around 7,500 BC, and this is very much a kind of a potted archaeology, we have evidence for hunter-gatherers, so people, in other words, who followed their sources of food around, so they weren't sort of settling for long periods of time. or permanently in the landscape. We weren't, you know, building permanent houses and field systems and all the rest of that. But that comes in around 4000 BC with the introduction of farming. And so we get our more permanent settlements. Archaeologists will find evidence of houses, field systems we know about in various parts of the country. So really, with the introduction of farming, you're kind of off to the races. And pretty much everything, every structure you could say that was built in the landscape for thousands of years after that, they were built by farming communities to serve their particular farming purposes. So really, you could say up until relatively recent times, you know, in terms of surviving and making a living and bringing up your family, agriculture and farming was the only show in town, and all the structures in the landscape reflect that. So even the towns, you could say, really were you know, the reason they existed was because of the produce that was brought into them from farming communities in the hinterland. So really, what's being preserved in archaeology in Ireland and in every country really is the sort of archaeology and heritage of farming communities. So there's a kind of circularity to you know, modern farming communities being encouraged and in some way hopefully incentivized to look after these monuments, which they have done anyway for millennia, clearly, because that's why we still have so many. So it's nice to recognize that and to acknowledge it as well, I think. So again, just to show you the kind of space, remind you of the type of monuments we have in this country that are so kind of special. And it's not going to be an exhaustive list. I'm not going to turn you into archaeologists, as I said. The idea is just to remind you again of the kind of space we're in and the quality of monuments and the range that we have in this country. So it's not an exhaustive list, but of course we have, you know, going back from, you know, 4000 BC up to about 2500 BC, we have a range of burial monuments, which are the oldest archaeological monuments in the landscape. This is a wedge tomb on the Burren in Cavan, if I remember correctly, but you'll all be familiar with the tombs in the Boyne Valley and all. They would fit into the same sort of class. We have these kind of enigmatic monuments, stone circles, stone rows, stone pairs that would all fit into a date range of around maybe 1700 to 800 BC. You know, usually their function is a little bit more mysterious. They sometimes are aligned in some way on significant solar or lunar events. We have burial monuments, again, a different class of burial monuments. These ones a little bit later, from maybe 2500 BC up way up into maybe, you know, 1000 BC, something like that. These are earthen barrows. They sometimes are quite large, like this one, a big sort of a bowl shape, but they can be very, very low profile, low, you know, barely visible in the landscape, quite large in diameter or quite small. They vary in shapes and sizes. There's and they have these related monuments then, which are cairns, which is kind of can serve the same function. Now they're harder to date, but you know, cairns were used for a lot of things over many millennia. But we have, so just to make the point that you can have earthen burial monuments, you can have stone burial monuments. A little bit more familiar then is our beloved ring fort, the most common monument type in the country. And this one, well, the range in which they were building these seems to have been, you know, maybe sort of 700 to 900 AD. They're the sort of dates that are coming from them when they're excavated. And they're essentially a defended farmstead. You can see this example has, you know, multiple banks and fosses being the bit dug into the ground, but they can be simpler. They can be just maybe one bank and a foss. And you know, as I say, a defended farmstead, very, very common across the countryside. The Anglo-Normans, of course, came to Ireland in the late 12th century, and they brought with them their particular monument types. This is a motte and bailey, a type of castle, actually, an earthen castle, an earthen mound. In this case, this is the one at Granard, which is the kind of granddaddy of them all. It's very, very large monument. And you're seeing kind of in the background, with the statue of St. Patrick on it, is a big earthen mound. It's actually a slightly modified hill, that one, but often they were made from, you know, literally from the ground up. And stretching out towards the camera then is a bailey, which was another, just a sort of a platform that could be enclosed, and it was at the foot of the motte itself. There's another example in Kilbixie in County Westmeath, Plenty of biodiversity on that one. We can talk about that a bit later too. We have various church sites earlier than this. This is a medieval one in Tipperary, but there are plenty that would be earlier. You know, we'd start seeing those appearing in the in the country in, you know, the early centuries AD. You know, maybe 7th century church sites are quite common. For example, you'd be familiar with, you know, Clonmacnoise. These early church sites became very large and powerful in the history of Ireland, and also these later medieval ones as well. We have castles in all shapes and sizes and states of preservation. This is what, a quarter of a tower house, but sometimes they're in terrific condition. You feel you could move in if you got Dermot Bannon on your side. So it's just to make that point of a very, well, then coming into the 17th century, we have these fortified houses in the early 17th century. That one's on Carbery Hill in Kildare. So it's just to make that point to you, again, not an exhaustive list of monuments, but just to remind you of the quality of the monuments that we have here and the kind of range of you know, monument types and the various purposes, the burial ones, the habitation ones, and military ones. A very wide range of monuments, most of them, as I say, privately owned on farmland and in various stages of various types of condition. We also have these types of monuments, which are monuments with little or no surface trace. Now you can see our little red dot there, and then radiating out around it, there are 3 sort of lines in the ground which indicate that even though the field clearly has been ploughed many times, one presumes, the archaeology is surviving still below the ground. So even though the monument is substantially, it mightn't even be visible at ground level, there's clearly a lot surviving below ground if it can leave that kind of a stain, you know, that's visible on an aerial photograph. So what you're seeing there really is probably the truncated bottom portions of banks and fosses that surrounded this monument, and plenty of archaeological evidence and information to be gleaned from it if ever it were excavated. So it is, you know, still very important archaeologically, that site, and we have quite a lot of those across the countryside as well. So again, just to kind of reiterate that until very recent times, it's an obvious point, most structures in the landscape were built by farming communities. It's largely a farming heritage that's being confirmed and it are being conserved. And it's important and it makes sense to help farmers to preserve it. There's archaeological monuments are protected, of course, in various ways. We have the National Monuments legislation, which I mentioned to you a little while ago, which is the body of legislation implemented by our department. We're also involved in the planning system. In a large part of my job, for example, is that I get planning referrals sent to me by planning authorities, and I make recommendations or make a decision as to whether archaeological work is needed before a development can proceed. We can even recommend, it's up to the council to make the final decision, but we can even recommend refusal if we feel that the impact on archaeology would be just too severe. We're cultural heritage in the broadest sense is a receptor, of course, in the whole environmental impact assessment process. And I'm sure many people watching will be familiar with the position of monuments in the whole cross-compliance kind of regime. And of course, sometimes things go wrong and monuments do get damaged or destroyed, and the National Monument Service has taken people to court in circumstances like that, and you know, a judgment has gone against them. And quite apart from whatever, you know, fine or they might receive for destroying the monument, it'll also have a very bad effect on their farm payments. So you know, that aspect of things is you know, exists as well. But let's not dwell on the negative. Why protect archaeological monuments? Well, it might seem like a kind of an obvious question to ask, but you know, you can protect them because they're useful. And I don't mean necessarily in that way, but I just wanted to show you that picture. It's Heritage Week, or it's nearly Heritage Week. I think just to kind of indulge myself a little bit in asking this question and answering it. I suppose, as Mark was saying in the introduction, you know, it mightn't be as important to everybody as it is to the likes of me. I suppose an archaeologist, you know, I would say that what one of the things that have gotten me interested in archaeology in the past was you'd kind of get moved by monuments. You know, they are very common in our landscape. They're a special part. Just drink water. they're an unusual and a kind of a special feature of our landscape. And there is something about the atmosphere of them, I find. I mean, again, I speak personally, it might apply to everybody, but you know, that you'd be curious about them. They'd make you want to know more. You think of, you know, the activity that happened around them in the past when they're being built or used, and what that means. When you think of, for example, you know, I say that they are important to people as they contribute to a sense of place. There are many heritage and historical and archaeological societies across the country, and also a great interest in you know, family history and so on. And when you think of people maybe coming back to visit a place where an ancestor of theirs had left, the thing that probably won't have changed that much might be the castle or the graveyard or the ring fort. You know, the field boundaries might have changed. A lot of even the natural heritage things, you know, the lake might have been drained or become smaller, whatever might have happened. The channel of the river might have changed, but the archaeological monuments hopefully will still be there. So they really do give a kind of a sense of place and a kind of a depth, a time depth, if I can put it that way, to our landscape. And of course, they're an educational resource for ourselves. I mean, forget for a moment about tourism. They're public goods par excellence, and they are a free kind of educational and recreational resource for our own population. And that's before you even get into, you know, people like me who like to study it at a different kind of level, at a more almost a kind of a scientific level. And I think to point out about archaeological monuments, of course, is that when they are gone, they're gone. There's no point in very little point really in rebuilding something, because it's not what it was. You know, it's not just the shape or the space it occupies. It's how it was built and how it came into being. And really, you can't, you know, reintroduce monuments to an area. Once they're gone, they're gone. And you see these things in the landscape as, you know, big stone or earth monuments, and they look a little bit indestructible, but really they're actually quite delicate. And you know, that's why you have to be so careful to try and reduce the impacts on them from generation to generation, because a little nip every now and again over the long periods of time that we're talking can result in a whole lot of damage. So it's important just to regard them as maybe more delicate and fragile than they seem. We'd also like to think that maybe the idea that monuments can be a potential for a financial benefit to farmers and landowners is coming into being as well. And we'll talk about that a little bit with regard to the agri-environment schemes in a minute. But, you know, there's also the potential from agri-tourism, and you know, it has contributed, as far as I'm aware, to some farm incomes. You know, where that will work, it's not possible for everybody, but you know, there is that potential. There's also rural development aspect to archaeological monuments. They can be very kind of you know, they can be very much kind of adopted by local communities and important to them, and be regarded as an asset, and something as well, of course, that will maybe literally become an asset in the sense that it might attract people to visit an area and become a kind of a selling point for overseas visitors. And that point is recognized in a wider context as well. Like all of these national and sectoral plans that I'm showing you on the screen have a lot of references in them to heritage, cultural heritage in the broadest sense, but also built heritage, you know, archaeology and protected structures, you know, significant buildings of one sort or another of all ages. So there's an awareness in these plans that there's something special in our landscape, in our countryside, in archaeological monuments, and you know, that there is a value to be had from them, and that they need to be looked after. So to move on a little bit then to an area that I do some work in, is archaeology in the Rural Development Programme agri-environment schemes. I'll broaden it out a little bit more from the schemes, but the area that I suppose I know more about is the agri-environment schemes, so we might stick with that for the moment anyway. And essentially there have been three over the years. The REPS, the Rural Environment Protection Scheme, which closed for reasons we would rather not discuss in what we'll all remember in 2009. The Agri-Environment Option Scheme succeeded it, and there was no archaeological action in that. And currently we have GLOS, the Green Low Carbon Agri-Environment Scheme, which opened in 2014. Now, I won't do a big kind of exhaustive trip through there were 4 phases of REPS, as I'm sure many of you know. I won't do a big exhaustive discussion around them. But just to pick, with regard to REPS 1 and 3, first of all, all of those phases had a Measure 7, which was entitled Protect Features of Historical and Archaeological Interest. And really, it was. I remember when REPS was first mentioned, it was of great interest to archaeologists, because I suppose you could say that it was really the kind of first time that we felt we could engage in this kind of way with archaeological monuments in private ownership on farmland. And the simple, what would you call it, the measure that was arrived at was just to provide buffer areas around monuments. And that sort of stayed with us in REPS and even into GLOS now. A very simple matter of just making sure that groundworks don't happen on or close to archaeological monuments. So that's been a unifying theme throughout REPS over the years and into GLOS. And the buffer areas have changed maybe in size over the years, but essentially that's what's remained in place. There was also over the years in REPS, thoughts and discussions and measures trying to encourage public access to monuments on farms. That kind of flared up and died down over time, and also to the discussions about ploughing, particularly over monuments with no surface trace. And that issue I'll discuss shortly. But that was also part of it, always a kind of a theme through the various phases of REPS. But it introduced, of course, the idea that monuments could attract to payment, and not necessarily a life-changing one, but it was a very good, thing to introduce into the whole discussion. And it also gave the opportunity, just quite apart from the specifics of the buffer areas, it was a great opportunity to introduce just general kind of common sense management practices. REPS was, these common sense things like avoiding damage by heavy machinery on continuous movement of animals across monuments, discouraging dumping of materials, or storage of materials, all these common sense things. Don't fence monuments off, that you could allow animals have access to monuments because the grazing kept down scrub. And that's a good thing. Once it's monitored and kept at a certain level, it's helpful, because you don't want scrub encroachment on monuments to an excessive degree. Siting troughs carefully, not using historic buildings for livestock. So all of these kind of common sense things, it was a great opportunity just to feed that in to the agri-environment scheme, and it was very helpful, really very helpful over the years. I'm concentrating just now on REPS 4, because just to point out a sort of a little shift that happened within it, in that the name of the action, it was still Measure 7, changed a little bit about to establish biodiversity strips around monuments of historical and archaeological interest. So you can see there's a kind of a shift there, that the protecting the monument part has changed a little bit. And of course, that was in response to the EU's growing concerns over climate change and water quality and biodiversity. And it was the first, I suppose, recognition that, quite apart from their value kind of in cultural heritage terms, archaeological heritage terms, that monuments are also quite often, well, almost always, I would say, foci of biodiversity. And you can see that in the specifications for REPS 4, they were saying that the buffer zones and margins might become uncultivated areas, which might become a refuge for rare plants. So it was just an interesting connection between archaeological monuments and biodiversity. Another good thing that came out of REPS as well, of course, was that there was a recommendation that any new sites that were found, and I say new sites, it sounds funny, monuments, in other words, that the National Monument Service didn't know about, we defer to them as new sites. There was a recommendation that the National Monument Service be told if a new site was discovered. And it can quite often happen that somebody will be looking at a monument, not seeing it on the National Monument Service maps, and presume it isn't a monument. But of course, it might just mean that we don't know about it. So we'd always encourage people to report, a new monument if that's what it appears to be. We can always come and check it out and see if it's the real thing or not. And it was clearly stated also then, as I touched on briefly already, that monuments shouldn't be fenced off because it causes, and this is something that came in a little bit in reps, and it sort of crept in. And I think, you know, with the best will in the world, it became a practice for some people to fence off monuments because, you know, they thought, well, what better thing could you do for a monument than to put a fence around it and nothing can harm it. But, and it's completely understandable, you know, we're not sort of judging anybody. But I suppose the unintended consequence was that scrub generation happened and some monuments became quite densely covered. And you've got then root action as well as, you know, burrowing animals congregating in these places as a result. So we tried to deal with that subsequently then in Gloss. So Gloss came along in 2014 and has two options in it of an archaeological nature. Again, one which you can see, the first one, establishing a margin around a visible archaeological monument in a tillage parcel. Of course, the word visible means that, you know, the monuments with no surface trace, which were, you couldn't plow over actually in Reps 4, are back now. You know, they're excluded somewhat in Gloss because it has to be a visible archaeological monument, which is, you know, upstanding. But in any case, it's the direct descendant of the margins and the buffer areas in Reps. And then the second one was to try and address this issue that had arisen a little bit in the course of Reps, to reduce the increase in scrub, you know, quick colonizing trees and invasive woody plants. It wasn't to be, the idea wasn't to sort of remove all vegetation from monuments. It was simply to stop the encroachment of scrub on monuments. So that's a current option in Gloss. So I brought your attention that aspect of Reps 4, where the sort of accent, the stress, if you like, was changed slightly in the archaeological measure to a sort of a biodiversity, more biodiversity sort of concentration on biodiversity, or at least a help to biodiversity. So I just want to give you a kind of a short history just to concentrate on that point a little bit of biodiversity and archaeological monuments in the agri-environment schemes and beyond, in actual fact. So we have the biodiversity strip idea introduced in Reps 4. And now this was something that we had, the National Monument Service had asked about over the years and wondered about, because do you remember in the ecological focus areas as part of greening, it seemed quite kind of logical from our point of view, from the National Monument Service point of view, that archaeological monuments would kind of fit into that space, you know, that they had potential to be ecological focus areas. And sure enough, in 2015, protected archaeological sites were designated as landscape features by the Department of Agriculture. The National Monument Service can take no credit for that. It goes completely to the Department of Agriculture. It was their idea and we were very grateful to them for doing it. But this meant, of course, if you kind of join the dots, that the biodiversity value of archaeological monuments was recognized and that they could be used as ecological focus areas. And even though, you know, in the context of the way things were organized, that might have affected a very small number of monuments, it was still very encouraging, you know, that this value of them was being recognized. So in big letters, biodiversity value of protected archaeological monuments has been accepted. But as I say at the end there, greening is no more. So has the moment passed? Well, we're going to talk now just a little bit about the future, but just before doing that, and I'll be finishing up fairly soon. That seemed quicker than I thought it would be. Just to remind us again of what we're dealing with, there's an archaeological monument, a ring fort up, I think, in County Mayo, a cashel, a stone fort in Galway, a ring fort also, I think, in Galway. What have these all got in common? Well, I mean, I'll go back through them very quickly. Where's the biodiversity? You know, you can see that they're in a field of grass. The biodiversity, there's a lot of biodiversity on the monuments. It's a kind of an obvious point, isn't it? It might need a bit of management, but it's there. Now, in the following points I'm going to make, I'm speaking to you as an archaeologist, obviously. I'm talking now about biodiversity. So you can kind of see that I'm not entirely in my comfort zone. And I make points that seem obvious to me. I think to develop them really, we need to be talking to ecologists and other people who can help us out with this. And also, of course, the deep understanding you need of of the rural development regulation and all of these things. Again, there are people who understand these much more clearly than I do, and maybe that will emerge in the questions and answers. But I'd certainly like to have views on this. So I'm kind of maybe floating things a little bit here. But say in the context now of CAP strategic plans. Now I know there'll be the agri-environment scheme still in the future, one hopes as well. But if we try and analyze this as much as we can in terms of archaeology and biodiversity and where monuments might fit into this, we can see that we know so far as I understand it, that the strategic plans have to address a number of general and specific objectives. And I've picked out these three, which seem to, which archaeological monuments might be able to contribute to. I won't go reading through them all, but I just draw your attention, I suppose, first of all, to GO3 there, to strengthen the socioeconomic fabric of rural areas. Well, as I was saying earlier on, there is a sort of a connection between archaeological monuments and rural development. It mightn't be, again, a game changer, but it's definitely there. And the images I showed you will make the point themselves about biodiversity and monuments, just in terms of the range of that. My understanding of what CAP strategic plans are supposed to do is that they answer these questions here. They'll answer national problems and needs aligned with the objectives. Well, I think we can say that there is, a particular, I don't know if this is answering this first point particularly well, but, that it is a very specific thing to this country that we have so many archaeological monuments. I think it's something that's not maybe known outside of Ireland. And, there is a kind of a specific issue there that maybe we can contribute to or address because of the unusual nature of our archaeological remains. Enhanced conditionality. Well, again, my understanding of that is that landscape features are at the core of enhanced conditionality, and protected archaeological sites are landscape features. Plans should be ambitious for the environment and climate. Well, I don't think, well, I guess that, they can be ambitious. I don't think archaeological monuments are all that niche. They kind of are, but we've 120,000, something like that, of them across the country. A lot of people have them on their land. Not everybody, as Catherine was saying, but a lot of people have them on their land. And, I think it maybe has a broader reach than one presumes, if you like. I've shown that we can tie into relevant EU legislation, national plans. I showed you a range of plans which mention, which have address, shall we say, heritage in the broadest sense, and certainly built heritage. Plans should establish a clear baseline and lay down ambitious actions. Well, there's where we need a lot of help, I suppose. I'm presuming that what they mean by that in that specific kind of a context would be that you'd see what your baseline biodiversity is and then start designing your management plans around that. Well, again, as I say to you, I'm speaking as an archaeologist. I'm kind of out of my comfort zone there. And that's where I think, the potential for some kind of interaction with people who know about this, about ecology and what we're dealing with, and, getting that sort of baseline data would be very useful from an archaeological point of view too. And again, as I just make the point again, I don't, be capable of attracting a large number of farmers and not be too specialist. Well, I think we might be, in the ballpark there too, maybe, because we have so many monuments. And they appear on so many farms across the country. So what kind of, if we manage to kind of make a case on that basis, then what sort of actions will be needed? Well, I mean, it is management we're talking about. There's no difficulty from an archaeological point of view with having a monument managed, provided it's done in a way that doesn't damage it. So you don't, like, rewilding isn't good from our point of view, because of course, that's scrub encroachment and all the rest, isn't it, that we're trying to kind of deal with. The gloss actions, not just the archaeological ones, I presume would still be of value, because we have buffer areas that it seems to me can be converted to a biodiversity theme, as they were somewhat in Reps 4. There are existing actions in gloss that it might be possible to just kind of point them in the direction of archaeological monuments, like tying bird boxes and bat boxes to existing trees on monuments isn't, I don't think, going to cause a problem from archaeology. I mean, all of this has to be thought through and worked through, and make sure that it's done in a controlled fashion, which is why I say that when you have archaeologists and maybe ecologists working on this, we can make sure that we don't sort of transgress anybody's legislation, our legislation, or any other. Taking monuments out of service, or with no service trace out of production, is certainly something that would be encouraged from an archaeological point of view. And it was part of Reps for a while. We'd be very happy to see that come back in. Some types of monuments benefit greatly from rewetting. Not all of them, but that can work for us in some circumstances. So that's really, what we'd be interested to see happening in the future, is to kind of go with this biodiversity, try and recognize the value of monuments from a biodiversity standpoint, and see what actions it might be possible to design around that idea in discussion with other disciplines, I suppose. And with the with the end aim, I suppose, of having monuments function as foci of biodiversity, with maybe a broader area around them, going over to organic or high nature value farming. I mean, I don't know how possible it is, but it would be, I love the image of the monument being the kind of center of things, and then other actions kind of radiating out from it. But we sure would need, if it were to happen at all, I mean, kind of floating things here, I suppose. It seems like the forum in which to do it. We'd certainly need input from other disciplines to achieve something like that. So thank you for listening this morning. I hope, and it's particularly gratifying to have been brought in Heritage Week. So I hope you've enjoyed my presentation this morning. Thanks for listening.
Thanks very much, Hugh. I've really enjoyed your presentation, and you make the point very well that we can't forget about archaeology when there's so much emphasis on climate change, biodiversity, water quality. There's a balance to be struck there. There's no doubt about that. And I think you're probably right about because we are particularly rich in archaeology in this country compared with other European countries, perhaps, that it's doesn't feature as highly on the agenda there at a CAP level. So it really is important for us to assert that within our CAP strategic plan. So that's something that there's consultation going on at the moment that people can have an input into. So I expected that will be another element that features. But it reminds me, of course, again, that all of these various different policies and targets that farmers are expected to adhere to. So that support network is crucial, really, isn't it, for farmers to have access to the correct information. And I suppose that leads on to my first question to you is if farmers do have a question or maybe are looking for advice on a particular management of maybe they have an archaeological feature on their farm, where is the best place for them to access that information? Or is there somebody they can talk to actually give some practical advice?
Yeah, there are both, really. The first stop would definitely be the historic environment viewer. I think they should look on that and see, is there any information? All of those little red dots have an accompanying file. Now, many of them, if you click on the red dot, you'll get a little bit of information, but there will be also a paper, not all of the red dots, but most of them. But there will also be an accompanying paper file. So, if your query isn't answered just by looking at that, then absolutely, definitely get in touch with the National Monument Service. And I mean, you have my email address there, but there's also just National Monuments, all one word, at housing.gov.ie, would be a great place to send in just a general query. And I mean, we get so many, sometimes it's a notification because there might be an impact on a monument. It's very important that we get those in. But there can be, you can send any kind of a general query in as well, and it'll be redirected to whoever, probably me or somebody else who'll deal with it for you. But absolutely, we'd like people to get in touch for sure.
Thanks, you. And Catherine, I mean, Teagasc has developed a number of publications around this over the years. I know that you have been instrumental in that side of things. What would be your advice to farmers looking for more information?
Well, I think their local advisor is the first port of contact for everything. And I think, the advisors know now who to come to, or, through myself or through archaeology. I think advisors are more aware now. I think that's the big change maybe too. And hopefully when advisors are out on farms, they will spot things and say that.
Hugh, when we look at the funding allocated to the protection and development of our archaeological network, how does Ireland fare when it compared to other countries or similar countries, for example, the UK? From looking from the outside in, it looks to me like the UK seem to put more emphasis on this or value attached to it. Am I right in that?
Yeah, I wouldn't quite say that really. Now, I don't really know the answer in detail to your question about sort of the funding side of things, but they run a kind of a different system. And again, I'm not a great expert on how they do things in the UK, but we, for example, have decided to give blanket protection to every monument. So there's a basic level of statutory protection to every monument here. Whereas in the UK, they do it slightly differently, so that kind of puts us in a different situation straight away, so we have that notification system where if there's work going to happen at or in relation to is the wording in the Act, in the National Monuments Amendment Act 1994. Then if there's work going to happen at or in relation to a monument, which doesn't mean on it, it can be close to it, we need to know about it in the National Monument Service and make a decision. So, and wow, I mean, how do you kind of put a price on that in a way? We certainly get a whole lot of those notifications in, and then of course, as I say, we're involved in different areas of the law of planning and so on, and even cross compliance. It's very hard to compare, but I know, having been at international conferences and things, what you do notice is, and I sort of started to go to some of these conferences just to get a flavor for how other countries are dealing with, their archaeological monuments as much as anything. And I mean, it was amazing to think of the kind of, for example, there was a case in Germany which was very, very interesting, where there was a portion of the Roman limes. It was the kind of Roman boundary between the Germanic tribes and the Roman Empire. And in this particular place, they had developed a massive interpretative center. But really what was left of the limes was a line under the soil. And I was all in favor of them having done it. But my goodness, when you think that we have so much upstanding here, it's just a different world, really.
And do you feel we're not fully exploiting that and deriving?
No, I think it's appreciated. I think, and sometimes I feel that there are bodies who know that there's something there that they want to form a policy around, but they're not quite sure. Maybe how to just get not so much body, to even kind of local groups, they're not quite sure where to get the information and where to go from there. That they might be very afraid of doing damage. But the fact is, if they interact, with the National Monument Service or whoever, then they can get the proper advice. You can bring things along. I don't think you do have to be very, very careful, as I was saying during the presentation, not to kind of overdo it, and you have to regard archaeological monuments as vulnerable, even though they don't always look it. But there are things you can do, and really it's just to create those kind of links. We're always very anxious to do it, between departments, between groups, whatever, to try and make sure that people don't hesitate because they think they're going to break the law, and maybe they're not, but also to kind of rein people in if they are going to go a bit too heavy-handed with things. So it's just to have that sort of communication, I think, is very important. Yeah.
We better get to the questions. Some really good questions coming in there, Catherine, if you'd like to.
And following on there, just two comments. One from Petra Knock Applegreen, where there's a fantastic archaeological EIP. We've heard of those for biodiversity, and the one up in Rathcrohan, where Pierre Kenny is very involved. But a lovely comment from Petra, Hugh, you'll be delighted to say that she's finding that farmers in the EIP have a great willingness to actively protect their archaeological once they receive guidance on how to do so. So, you know, and she thinks it's very important that farmers get support, both educational and financial, to protect it. So that's a lovely, and it's a very fantastic EIP there. Just another comment, vernacular features, a query on that, and I think we're talking there about the traditional buildings, and we shall be following on in nice order, I think, you next week with Anna Meehan with the traditional buildings on farms, bringing it up a little bit more modern, but not modern. And then a question for you that I'm interested in where did the monuments in the UK countryside go? Are we just better at protecting them?
Oh, I think it's difficult to answer that in detail. There's plenty of kind of theories, I guess, but I think it's different agricultural practices, maybe, you know, just different historical circumstances, really. I couldn't go into any greater detail than that. You know, that seems to have been the case. It's a very, very hard question to answer. I mean, in other European countries, you can even cite, you know, rolling artillery bombardments in some, you know, they've had 2 world wars in Belgium and France, and, you know, ripping up vast tracts of places. And I know in some countries, as a result of the war, and not necessarily the UK, they were putting every square inch into production. And I saw a photograph once of a plow that they were using, I think, to break through wetlands in some part of Germany, and the thing was, you know, inconceivably long. So everything would have been destroyed. So I think there were just certain historical factors that other countries encountered and we didn't. And of course, really, there wasn't so much ploughing going on in this country. You know, it was a cattle-based economy, wasn't it, for many centuries? And I think, you know, the necessity to disturb the ground wasn't there, and that's played a part for us as well. But also, I think maybe you'd like to think, and I'm sure it's true, that you know, pish roads and superstition, but also on the positive side, interest maybe stopped people from destroying things. You know, they had a feel for the places, and they survived.
We'll take some credit for it anyway. Yeah, a question there: should we be encouraging public access to archaeological features, or is it better? Are they better preserved where there's limited public access to them?
Oh, I think now, bearing in mind that most of the monuments are on private land, we can't be encouraging people to go in onto people's private land, for sure. So that's something people have to kind of arrange themselves. But in the general sense, where monuments are accessible and you're allowed to go on, absolutely, we want people to go on there, and you know, to be aware that, you know, it's a finite resource and you have to treat it carefully. You know, like so many, you know, even in the natural heritage area, you know, they say you go and you leave nothing but silence and take nothing but, you know, memories, that sort of stuff. Absolutely, we want people to go and enjoy them and know about them and be interested, because that's, well, I guess there's a kind of passive surveillance in that, but also it's just, you know, the more people who are interested and curious about this, about archaeological monuments and archaeology generally, the better, really.
There was a comment there that you made during your presentation, Hugh, about greening is no more. Could you elaborate on that just a little bit?
It's not going to be part. I think just maybe it's now. Catherine will probably explain this even better, but my understanding is that it's not going to be part. Sure, it's not as a term, whatever about. You know, I'm using the technical term greening, I suppose, rather than, you know, environmental.
Yes. Okay. Yes.
It's more the technical term, as far as I understand it. That's going, isn't it, in the future?
Yeah. Greening is being replaced by, I suppose, eco schemes. Catherine,
yes,
would that be
exactly.
fair to say?
Yeah. So hopefully, archaeology will be in there, and
yes,
in every facet.
Yeah. Yeah, it was green in capital G, really. I was I was aiming for there. Yeah, yeah.
And Mark, a few the scrub issue, some confusion on the in the questions there, and again, but very clear from Mary Doherty and Teclan Doug, ecologists there, about the fantastic biodiversity on the monuments. Mary Doherty saying she did a survey surveying these and provided guidelines on particular monuments, and that could be elaborated nationwide. And again, Declan Doug saying the archaeological features with a high protruding stone or bedrock exposed components that are particularly significant for mosses, liverworts, and species of shallow soils. And again, flee from rewilding. So I think that answers other questions there about a slight confusion. And I think I would explain it that, like, scrub is good for biodiversity, but you know, we can have biodiversity on every other inch of the soil, and the archaeological ones that are here for whatever thousands of years. I would always say that the overriding consideration is the archaeology, and maybe the rare species that Declan talks about there, that have never been touched for maybe thousands of years. But you know, where biodiversity, they go hand in hand. I think there's no issue, there's no problem there. But it's just that scrub is bad for monuments. I think we need to get that clear, and that was what was kind of misunderstood a few years ago.
Yeah, well, I would never want to totally denude them. You know, if there's I don't know, vegetation of whatever sort that's been there for many years, I don't think there's a difficulty with tearing that stuff up too, because you can damage the monument. You know, so I wouldn't necessarily want to sort of denude all the monuments in the country. Not a chance. I mean, even that photograph, if you remember, that in the presentation of the motte at Kilbixie, like, there are some very large trees on that, and I look at it and I think, yeah, I wouldn't be for cutting them down now at this stage, unless one of them was at a very precarious angle and you thought it might fall. But so and I feel the same way about scrub. I mean, there is that balance. You don't want to kind of destroy biodiversity, shall we say, to strip everything off the monuments. It doesn't make sense in this day and age, I don't think. But
I think it's encroaching scrub.
It's encroaching scrub is what we're after. It's just to kind of keep it at a level, you know. Yeah.
We just have a time for probably one or two final questions. There's a question there in relation to the use of satellite imagery or remote sensing data to find low visibility site or crop marks. Is the National Monument Service using this type of technology, or do you see that being used to do some sort of mapping of the countryside and those subterranean type features might be picked up?
Yeah, we do use it. It's not something I'm kind of involved in myself, so I'm probably not the best person to answer. But I know, for example, after was it the very hot summer? Was it 2018 or 19 or something? Was it?
Yeah.
The imagery that came out from the Boyne Valley was extraordinary, and you know, it's available online. You can see things that we you know, just in magnificent detail, and I think that was drone footage actually. But we do use LiDAR and stuff to a degree, but it's not universal. But I mean, when I started, for example, looking at planning applications years ago, we had the RMP maps, you know, which was essentially, they were Ordnance Survey 6-inch sheets, some of which were surveyed in, you know, the 40s. So there were entire housing estates, you know, suburbs actually, on the ground that weren't on the maps. And now we have, just even on the Historic Environment Viewer, we have, you know, 2 satellite imageries, the first edition, the what's called the current edition 6-inch, the 25-inch, you know, and even on the satellite imagery, you can see so much really that you couldn't see on, you just hadn't got any way of seeing, maybe even only 10 years ago or something. So it's changed a lot, but those really detailed ones, yeah, it is used, and there are various surveys happening, but I'm not kind of in the know about them in detail. But certainly it's amazing what you know, even drone footage can turn up now, you know. Extraordinary.
Thanks, Hugh. Catherine, we're about to wrap up. Do you have any final comments you'd like to make?
Final comment again from Lorcan Scott there about National Heritage Week, to remind people, www.heritage.ie. You can search by county, and he was given examples there relevant today: of foraging to farming in County Galway, a virtual tour of archaeology on a Burren farm. So go and look it up. Thanks, Mark.
Well, I'm just sharing the website there, and it like Orkin said, you can just type in your county and search whatever area you're interested in. Okay, Hugh, thanks so much for really excellent presentation and some really good ideas there for the powers that be for future schemes as well.
Great.
Always good to put these out there. And Catherine, thanks for helping with the questions today and organising the series of talks as part of Heritage Week. It's really, really important topic. And I also want to thank Yvonne Maher, who's in the background helping us today with the technical side of things. And of course, Andy Boland, who is the series producer. So with that, we'll say goodbye, enjoy the weekend and continue exploring the countryside, and hope to get you get to enjoy some of the events as part of Heritage Week. Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.